So you get lots of railroad towns that spring up. And then over in the Joplin area, when that town booms in the 1870s, you get the introduction of the railroad there. Obviously, the railroad companies are there to take advantage of the mining boom in the Joplin area. And we'll talk a little more about mining in a little bit, specifically with Joplin. So you can see gradually these places are getting connected. Now, as we'll see when we look at a map, we're leaving huge chunks of the Ozarks that aren't served by railroads. And a lot of the Ozarks remains rather remote when you look at their ability to travel and communicate with the rest of the country. Springfield, as I mentioned, became a major railroad town. It becomes largely because so many railroads intersect in Springfield, and we've just mentioned the one so far, but eventually you get a second major railroad, the Kansas City, Fort Scott, and Memphis, that comes in obviously from Kansas City, Fort Scott, Kansas, into Springfield, and then builds on to Memphis. And that's the railroad that builds out east of town and follows Highway 60 east of town. And because of these railroads crossing in Springfield, you get a major railroad town, so that by the late 1800s, early 1900s, the railroad industry is the primary industry of Springfield. It employs more people than anything else, and it's really what makes Springfield go, is all of this rail traffic. Ash Grove is an example of just one of numerous railroad towns that boom in the late 1800s and early 1900s with all the rail traffic and all the commerce that's generated because people from all over the countryside bring things to sell and to ship out on the railroads. And so these towns become busy little places. Even places today like Sparta and Chadwick and little towns today that aren't on the railroad, back in the days when they had branch railroads leading everywhere, those were very busy places. And today you drive through those places and there's nothing going on. There's barely a store there and a little bitty school or something. But back in the day, late 1800s, early 1900s, these were booming places with people bringing in railroad ties and cattle and hogs and different things to ship out on the rails, lots of timber and lumber. So there, of course, Ash Grove is a good example of these. So far we've mainly talked about Missouri. The Arkansas Ozarks get railroad service later than Missouri because the railroads in the Arkansas Ozarks tend to come out of Missouri. And both, you get in the 1880s a railroad that's built into extreme northwestern Arkansas down to Fayetteville, that area. And you get one that's built into the northeastern part of the Arkansas Ozarks, the Kansas City, Fort Scott, and Memphis. As it goes to Memphis, it goes through the Arkansas Ozarks down. It goes through West Plains and then heads down into Arkansas from there. And so much of Arkansas is, by the time the 1900s roll around, much of Arkansas is still without railroad service, much of the Arkansas Ozarks. Here's our Missouri Railroad map. This is from the year 1888. So we're going back a little ways. What jumps out at you about this map as you look at it, as it has to do with the Ozarks?
Where are we?
Okay, here's Greene County right here. You can see this.
Is that Springfield?
This is Springfield right here. Yeah.
Those Red Lines Railroad? Are those Red Lines Railroads?
Yeah, these all these thick lines are railroads. Some of them are blue, some of them are red. If that was a clearer map, somehow they're color coordinated by the company, by the rail line on there.
Where's Kansas City?
Kansas City is up here. course.
Just looks like the roads now. Is that what you were thinking?
That's one of the things that you notice is that,
I-44 and I-70 would be in
right,
60.
There's 13 going up to
right.
Kansas City.
This railroad is roughly what I-44 is today. You've got I-60 heading out this way, not I-60, US 60 coming out this way. You don't really, 63 down through here. I'm not sure.
There seems to be more railroads in the northern part of the state.
That's something you notice immediately is that the northern part of Missouri, which tends to be more fertile, more productive agriculturally, has a whole lot more rail service. If you lived somewhere in northern Missouri, you're more than likely you're going to live within a day's wagon ride of a railroad somewhere because there's so many of them. Down in here, there are big swaths of the Ozarks, and we're not even looking at the Arkansas Ozarks, which had almost no railroads in 1888. There are big swaths of the Ozarks down here where you could live a whole long ways from the railroad, and the railroad really wouldn't be a factor in your life at all, or not that you could tell.
What about those two lines, well, three of them, that seem to stop? They're coming south. and
Like this one.
Now farther to the northwest.
Oh, this.
Yeah, like that one. and
Yeah.
that one.
That's just as far as they had been built in 1888. The companies may have continued to build them after the map was made, or they may have just built them to a specific place and said, this is as far as we want to go. I don't really know. I mean, that happened a lot. Sometimes lines got built to places. Well, Ava had a railroad at one time, and it was I'm not sure, some of this is hard, that it was just built off of the main line of the railroad down to Ava for a number of years, and then, eventually they said, well, this is not making us any money, let's just take up this track and not mess with this.
It still goes through Mansfield.
Yeah, that railroad,
Town Square, but
yeah.
never seen the one they go.
Yeah, it was taken up a long time ago. But some of these, like this one, which comes down here, I'm not sure. It could just be timing.
Maybe they met a river or something, couldn't get over it. Where is Willard on that map?
Willard is going to be out here somewhere.
Because there was a railroad there.
Yeah. Well, in the Springfield area, there are all kinds of little, you got main lines and you've got branch lines that go all over the place. As I mentioned earlier, you can see this line here that's no longer there, that goes all the way down to Chadwick in Christian County. And so you had lots of these. Here's another line that goes up here to Polk County. And the map it's a little bit hard to tell in some cases what's a creek and what's a railroad on that map, but because they put all the creeks and rivers and stuff on there too. But that is a good point, that it's obvious that there weren't as many railroad lines in the Ozarks as there were in the rest of Missouri, and a lot of that had to do with terrain. It was harder to build railroads. It was more expensive to build railroads in the Ozarks because you had to go over or through hills and hollers and you had to build bridges all the time over these streams. And, it's an expensive endeavor to grade these roads and put all that stuff in there. And it's also, many places in the Ozarks, it's not necessarily a paying endeavor for railroad companies. A railroad company could build a railroad out into the middle of Texas County or down into Ozark County, but why would they? As I said, they don't build railroads in places where they don't think they're going to make money by being able to ship something, carry something. And in some of these places where agriculture is not all that great, where there aren't minerals somewhere under the ground, there's just not really any reason to build a railroad into these places. Unless a railroad's just building through on its way to somewhere else, like it was when they built from Springfield down here or down into there. There are some places that just happen to get on the rail line because they're in the right place. They're in the place where the railroads are going to be building through on their way from somewhere to somewhere else. But
When did they drain southeast Missouri?
drain southeast Missouri, for the most part, I believe in the early 20th century. I'm sure they did probably some in the late 1800s, but they did a lot of draining in the early 20th century, setting up levee districts and collecting tax money to build all those levees and But you can see here, even in southeast Missouri, you've got several railroad lines running around, but that was cotton country, or beginning to be cotton country, and there was some wealth down there, even in those early days before they drained parts of it.